Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I'm Laura Griego, the Director of Education and Volunteers at El Rancho de las Golondrinas, Santa Fe's premier living history museum. Welcome to the 2025 Winter Lecture Series, Speaking of Traditions. El Rancho de las Golondrinas has been hosting this lecture series since 1999, and we are happy to partner with the New Mexico Museum of Art in presenting it. At this time, please remember to silence your cell phones. There will be time for questions following the presentation. And at the end of the lecture, please exit the auditorium and wait to speak with Dr. Nelson briefly in the lobby if you wish. The museum has to close up soon after the end of the presentation. Everyone can support both Las Golondrinas and the New Mexico Museum of Art by becoming members and/or volunteers. Check out our websites for details or join us on your way out this evening. It makes a huge difference and we really appreciate it. For those of you watching this broadcast later on the Golondrinas live sessions, please post any questions in the comment section and they will be addressed. Please visit our website and social media for details about the other two presentations in this series and our upcoming 2025 season. I look forward to seeing you all at all of our events this season. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Timothy E. Nelson, presenting the Afro-Frontier, Blackdom, Borderlands, and African Diaspora in the Digital Age, where we'll learn about the first all-Black town in New Mexico, Blackdom, the most important Black homestead colony in the state's history. Dr. Nelson was born in South Central Los Angeles and raised in Compton, California. He played football at Compton and Santa Monica Junior College before transferring to New Mexico State University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in U.S. history. While earning his master's degree in Black history at the University of Northern Iowa, Dr. Nelson earned a commission as an officer in the U.S. Army. He earned his PhD from the University of Texas at El Paso. His dissertation, The Significance of the Afro-Frontier in American History, Blackdom, Body Houses, and Barratry in the Borderlands, 1900 to 1930, tackled foundational issues in African American history, the history of the U.S. West, Borderlands history, and the history of African diasporas. He was the Racial Justice Director at the YWCA El Paso del Norte region, the largest YWCA in the United States. He is also a proud charter member of Phi Beta Sigma, whose motto is Culture for Service and Service for Humanity. Through his research of Blackdom, Dr. Nelson discovered descendants of original Blackdomites across the U.S., including Compton. These young people are surprised and interested to learn of Black cowboys in their recent family history. His work focuses on the economic and social ambitions of Afro-Frontierists, also known as Black pioneers. Instead of a story of a failed township of Black people fleeing racial violence, lynching, and second-class citizenship, he found Blackdomites left the South and Midwest in search of opportunity and sovereignty. Dr. Nelson lives in northern New Mexico, where he continues his research and works closely with Blackdom's land-owning descendants. His book, Blackdom, New Mexico, The Significance of the Afro-Frontier, 1900 to 1930, was published in 2023 by Texas Tech University Press and will soon be available as an audiobook. And now, without further ado, please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Timothy E. Nelson.
Testing. My apology. Got you? Okay. So, before I begin, I would like to thank you all for coming. I'm a substitute teacher in the Santa Fe Public Schools. Okay. And this is a digital presentation. We will get to that in a moment. And if you decide to focus in on the digital part and tune me out, that is kind of okay, because as a substitute, I am used to a distracted audience. So, okay. This is a picture of Blackdom that includes the Afro-Frontier. And let me see here, okay. We will have about an hour, okay, to cover the contents of my recently published book. And I turned it into a digital installation that you can actually take home with you. We will focus on chapter 6 and highlight my discovery of the Blackdom Oil Company. If you have your phones, put them on silent and keep them at the ready. You may need them in order to do some of the research yourself to make sure I'm correct. In the space between New Mexican racism and no Jim Crow law enforcement, Black people created an Afrotopia in the southeastern section of the New Mexico territory. Because New Mexico was not a state, Black people had a chance to realize their eternal striving of sovereignty. If you have your phones, you can take a quick picture, and it will lead you to the actual presentation. This presentation will move quickly as it goes along. The information that I am providing will be minimal compared to the depth and breadth of the information. Take your time getting your phones. It's okay. Consider it like a digital fidget spinner, right? This is a map of what we call the United States, but in the 1700s. Notice we are only talking about 0.5, maybe, of the whole total landmass. And our histories tell us that there was nothing beyond that. Too often, Black people, and the histories told, leave much to be desired outside of the institution of slavery. Looking at a map of the late 1700s America, it would not include places past the 98th meridian, today Texas and North Dakota. For this reason, among others, Black people are only seen through the lens of enslavement to freedom. This is the intellectual genocide that we must attack today. In New Mexico, along the Rio Grande, there had already been the enslavement of indigenous and native peoples, which was part of an earlier European colonial project headed by the Spanish. The perpetual and ongoing genocide of indigenous and native peoples was only accelerated when New Mexico became a U.S. territory in the mid-1800s. Please answer both questions. This is the census of 2020. Please answer both question 6 about Hispanic origin and question 7 about race. For this census, Hispanic origins are not At this point, I want you to suspend whatever history you got in America and understand that there is a 1519 project that coincides with the 1619 project. We're going to talk more through the lens of 1519 rather than 1619. We'll get to that in a moment. The perpetual genocide, particularly after statehood, can be seen in U.S. Census records. According to the U.S. government, Hispanic origins are not races. Today, please see the Human Genome Project for details. Race does not exist, and by extension, white people ceased to exist in 2003. Question. Raise your hand if you believe Egyptians are white. I know there's somebody in here. Raise your hand if you scared. You believe Egyptians are white? Okay. Two decades after white people no longer existed, in 2020, white people in this country, purported Egyptians, are now white people. Past the 98th meridian, we all live in a perpetual big lie. In 2020, there was another big lie that ended America's democracy as we know it, small d. But that's another story.
Evening, sir. Folks. Oh my, I see I've interrupted your supper. Forgive me. But my sons and I wonder if we might water our horses and purchase a few supplies from y'all.
Please, come in.
Thank you.
Are you hungry?
Oh, we don't want to bother you, ma'am. Just some water for the horses, maybe some jerky or hardtack, if you got any for purchase, and then we'll be on our way.
Please, sit down.
Keep an eye on them other houses.
That was a scene from Godless. Again, if you have the digital, you can watch that later. I only have 60 minutes. So that scene is, spoiler alert, they kill everybody in Blackdom, in Netflix land. The clear and present danger of intellectual genocide is perpetuated now by writers, actors, artists, and filmmakers, along with government entities. This is the 14th census of the United States in 1920, where the government created white people out of, anybody know? Mexicans. They created white people out of Mexicans, and you can look in closer and you'll see that they were railroad workers and boarders. Now, race doesn't exist, but in 1920 it did, and they were able to create white people out of Mexicans. When we talk about the 1619 project, for example, it helps us to understand from the 1920s through the 2020s, the U.S. attempt to Americanize in Manifest Destiny. The American narrative trajectory that began around 1619 constructed a basic black-white binary with a third designation for Indians.
The 1619 Project is a series of essays, of short stories, of poems, and photography that really examines the 400-year legacy of American slavery. So the year 1619 marks the year that the first Africans were sold into the colony of Virginia. And through this series of essays, we really argue that very little about modern American life has been left untouched by this foundational institution.
Again, the digital will provide you with more information. The 1619 Project, published in the New York Times, can give us an idea of the American trajectory westward. Blackdom, New Mexico, I argue, was also an extension of a northward trajectory of African descendants in diaspora that started around 1519. What we're describing is the genocide of indigenous peoples with black people at the tip of the spear. There are many borderland histories to speak to the trajectory. Now, if you have some digital need to go through a lot of what I'm describing, you can get that on this side. All of those digital places is where I have created bite-sized lectures that are maybe sometimes 1 minute long, 30 seconds long, but what you get is exactly what I'm giving you in this presentation. I have colonized the digital frontier. Major blockchains and AI platforms. All you need to do is just search for the Afro-Frontier. That's me and my daughter and my brother. This is what Blackdom looks like. Now, if you have your phone and you want to see Blackdom, you can Google Roswell Correctional Center. We'll get to that in a moment. New Mexico lands on this, which is a square mile. It is the only thing keeping the descendants of Blackdom from reaching Blackdom. I have animated Blackdom because if one goes to Blackdom, it will disappoint if you do not know what you are looking for. Before Blackdom Commons became a gerrymandered prison colony, you will see that there was also a World War II Nike missile silo in Blackdom Commons using Blackdomite land. Here, this purple area over here, square mile, and they still own that land, the Heron family. And I'm going to skip past that. That's just me providing you the forward. So this is what we were really getting to, okay? Earlier it was described that I wrote a dissertation. And in that dissertation was the history of Blackdom, but the theory or thesis of Afro-Frontierism. If you look at the common story of Blackdom, this will not appear. I am the one who discovered that Blackdomites struck oil in the Roaring '20s during the Harlem Renaissance. For this portion of the presentation, consider the topics presented and as a sketch or an outline, because a lot more happened than just this. I picked out the ones that I wanted to talk about today, and I'm not going to be able to get to talk about all of them, but I'll give you a little bit. 100 years ago, Blackdom was a boom town. During the 1920s, Blackdom was an Afro-Frontier. However, in part due to the oversaturation of the 1619 trajectory westward and the tricultural myth, it is difficult to see any significance in black folks who struck oil within 20 years of creating a town. Now, I can understand the town existed 30 years in a place where history began itself. Sometimes that can seem insignificant. You can be the judge. Now, in revival, Blackdomites were in full Afrotopia. This is the 1910 census. And you can look at it yourself, but this is Boyer's family. Imagine if you were born and you were the first to be born outside of the institution of slavery. You had 10 kids and 1 wife. You then moved past the 98th meridian from Georgia, and you bring your father with you. You have just become Joshua, delivering the children of Israel to, there you go. Somebody been listening. But notice this, there is no question that they were black. A decade later, will pool acreage. The Blackdom people are making final arrangements to pool their land, and when it is all in, they expect to have in excess of 10,000 acres. That's when they began the oil company. So this is where we get into the Afrotopia of it all, okay? Now these three events can describe to you the dynamics here. Okay, so I'm going to try to set the scene for you as I am reading through. Now, Ruth Loomis Skeen. Has anyone heard of Ruth Loomis Skeen? Yes? She used to write poems while in Santa Fe about Santa Fe. She's also from a very wealthy family in Artesia. Is anyone familiar with Joseph Skeen? He was a legislator from southeastern New Mexico. They named the Chavez County Clerk's Office the Skeen County Clerk Office. Now, Ruth Loomis Skeen, a white woman, wrote to W.E.B. Du Bois, a towering figure in Black intellectualism. She wrote to him while he was in New York during the Harlem Renaissance. She sent a letter from the white side of town to the black side of town. We'll read some of her letter. You can read others later. I'm just going to read one section now. There are not many colored people in this part of our state, although we have many Mexicans. And the race feeling about them is quite bitter. They are not allowed to enter a white barbershop, nor to eat in a white man's eating place. Does that sound like Mexicans were able to exist as white people here in New Mexico? Remember that? That was the November 1920 Crisis magazine. However, in the northern part of the state, they own a good deal of property and are well educated and hold positions of trust and honor. Our governor is a Spanish American born in Old Mexico. Of course, historically, the Spanish people have a perfect right here, and there are persons in the state possessing a fair attitude towards them, but they are only what Ruskin calls a little group of wise hearts in a wilderness of fools. Near here is a settlement of Negroes, a little town called Blackdom, consisting of farmers who have wrenched every bit of good out of our bitter soil. They are quiet, good citizens, and molest nobody. They have had little chance for the cultural things of life, and I believe they would welcome an opportunity to take your papers and magazines. Of course, they may already know about them. They have a little school and a church. At any rate, I will be glad to go over in my car, 1920s, and take them the books. From the white side of town, Artesia, to Blackdom. We will get to the maps in a minute. Now, we're still trying to contextualize Afrotopia and the Afro-Frontier. So what are the intentions of Frank Boyer, who was a 32-degree Freemason, or 33, I think he ended up. and his wife, who was also a Freemason adjacent person, a part of the Negro Order of the Eastern Star. Was Blackdom about black supremacy, you imagine? I'm asking a rhetorical question. You can see that this was intentional. This wasn't the idea that, oh, these lowly people were running away from white people out of the South and trying to seek refuge. This is different. He changed his name from Francis Frank Marion Boyer to Frank Boyer. This is intent. You can see this in the paperwork. Ella Boyer, making sure you know I'm his wife. May 28th, 1920. Has anyone ever heard of the Blackdom narrative? Anyone? No? Okay. In the standard narrative, it says that Blackdom ceased to exist at the start of 1920s. In the mid-1920s, if you're lucky, if the researcher had any integrity. We won't go through all of this, but the idea is to see how black folks understood a tangible means of expression. Remember, the Boyer family was already in Afrotopia for a whole decade. The whole family was on the census records, which means that they exist. What does it mean to be on a census record and exist in your own town called Blackdom that you created, that you incorporated? This is an incorporated town. What you see here is the final product after you incorporate a town, which is to plat the town. And I showed you the predicament it is in because New Mexico Lands is the people in charge of the land that keeps Blackdomites out. But you will see here that the whole intent of Blackdom, and the 40 acres in particular, was use and benefit of the public. A little bit deeper into the Afrotopia of it all. A tangible means of black expression. A tangible means of expression you can actually register with the government, right? You can own something if it's a tangible means of expression, right? Mark Bradford, multi-millionaire in the art world, an acclaimed visual artist, in 2022, decided he would focus in on 1913. Now, why 1913? Again, a rhetorical question. Now, in 1913, black people were already in the Crisis magazine. This right here is a 1913 article that he used for his art to talk about Blackdom in 1913. Ruth Loomis Skeen, 7 years later, writes to the same magazine to tell Du Bois, oh, by the way, I found this thing. I discovered Blackdom. 7 years after Blackdomites had already told the Crisis magazine, we are here. My question, if I was an artist, would have focused on will drill at Blackdom. This was in 1920. In 1920, from January 6th through June, on a daily basis in the Roswell Daily Record, Blackdomites advertised their oil company with the headline, "Will Drill at Blackdom." Has anyone ever heard of the Blackdom Oil Company? To give you an idea of what we're talking about and where we're talking about, Artesia's at the bottom and Roswell is at the top. And right in the middle is Blackdom. Jim Crow. If you are not familiar with it, you should have your phones at the ready and you can Google it. However, Jim Crow stopped at the Pecos River at first, before statehood. 5 miles from the Pecos River is Blackdom. And they struck oil in less than 20 years. Dexter, a mile and a half west of the Pecos River, is where Boyer homesteaded first. I want to say it like that so that you understand that this was intentional. This was not some random thing. It was intentional. Boyer has a legacy that I don't have to go through here. You can get the book and it'll give you a better idea of what I mean, but it was intentional. Extra, extra. Read all about it. September 1, 1920. The Roswell Daily Record reported Blackdom location made. I'm going to say that again. Blackdom location made. What are we talking about? The location for the deep test well at Blackdom, south of this city, Roswell, has just been made. This well, it's a clue, will be drilled a quarter of a mile west of Blackdom. And the derrick, what are we talking about? Okay, so you just learned something new today, huh? And the derrick is now under construction. The well will be put down by a California syndicate represented here by Vern Lincoln. A rotary rig will be used to go the first 1,000 feet, and excellent progress is expected. Now, question. Does anyone know how or what they say why Blackdom ceased to exist? The one element, water, right? Drought? Anyone? No? Water. They couldn't find water, but they can go 1,000 feet to find oil. Artesia had water, Lake Arthur had water, Dexter had water, and Roswell had water. To give you a little bit more of an animation, Jim Crow was everywhere. It was omnipresent, even past the Pecos River. So if Blackdom ceased to exist in the 1920s, but you're a black man, and you just homesteaded on Mescalero Apache Reservation land. Again, this is indigenous land that they are consuming because this is a colonization process. You're a black man in the 1920s and you just got a total of 160 acres. Forget 40 acres and a mule. This is 4 times as much. Are you just going to abandon it? I'll give you a hint. The family still owns it today and have been paying taxes on that land for the last 100-some years. The Heron family is the one that I focus on. A lot of people focus on the Boyer family. I focus on the Heron family. And in October, we took the first group of Heron family descendants to the land that they didn't even know existed before we told them. Again, to give you an idea of what's going on, the Roswell Correctional Center is here at the end of Chickasaw Road. If you've ever been down that way, Chickasaw Road is really scary, actually, but I digress. Roswell Correctional Center is at the end of that, okay? Most people will stop there, we won't. Again, the state lands is here, and this is the 40 acres, Blackdom Town Square. But look at where the homesteads of the Heron family is and how big it is. But they can't access it because of that yellow spot right there. Oh yeah, and that's Erasmus Heron. The 3rd generation, Vincent Heron. So once you go past the prison, you end up on Wyo Road, okay? Again, state lands, bordering the Heron lands. And I can tell you more about the developers and the ranchers over there, but we only have 60 minutes. Here is where Richard Heron, who had no idea this place existed. Vincent, I just showed you, 3rd generation. This is the 4th generation. Had no idea his family owned 1,500 acres today. Had no idea. He felt really good when he stood on top of this windmill. So I'm going to pause a bit because I've given you a lot of information and now I'm just going to give you a little bit of current events. A suggestion to understand the Afrotopia, Afro-Frontier, and the consciousness of black folks, you can see it in Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. Now, there's a certain irony with that book. Her grave is in Altadena, California, where Richard Heron lived all his life. So black people from Blackdom moved to California. The oil royalty allowed the families to exist in the suburbs instead of in the ghettos. So this idea that all black people, especially in the 20th century, were from the ghetto, not exactly. And you can see here, this is just one headline of the fires that are taking place right now, decimating Altadena. Often, Blackdom is seen through the lens of it not existing because in 1922, Blackdomites sold their church. Now, I just showed you that people were still homesteading in 1921. Oil company exists. Thank you, you got the timer there. I was wondering, I was like, how far am I in? 1922, the church is sold. Now, why would you sell your church if you just struck oil during the 1920s, Harlem Renaissance? Why would you sell the church knowing that the church was the center of attention in black towns in general? Now I'm going to give you what the article says, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper. The church building was purchased from Blackdom community and moved to Cottonwood community, about 8 miles from Artesia. From Artesia. And a whole lot of preachers from the nearby towns came in to preach all day in that church that they purchased from Blackdom. So, my question to you, why would black people who struck oil and are still homesteading in the 1920s decide to sell their church? Under the auspices of the Roswell Pioneer Clan, chapter number 15, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, realm of New Mexico, the lecture will explain the principles of the Ku Klux Klan, the people of Roswell, both men and women, are cordially invited to attend this meeting and hear this lecture. Now, black folks know when the Klan is coming. You're talking about people who are from the South. Before the Klan even announced, black folks already knew this. But they struck oil and are still colonizing indigenous land through the homestead process. Throughout New Mexico, what you will see is, through the legal system, the genocide was committed. Using fraternal orders, the Masonic lodges, and the churches. Even though the church was sold, and it appears as though Blackdomites no longer existed, or Blackdom no longer existed, Du Bois wrote back to Blackdom. He was offering a reading list to Clinton Ragsdale, which means that Clinton Ragsdale was still in Blackdom. And considering New York as important. There we go. This is the quitclaim deed for the 40 acres that went to Crutcher Eubank. We won't go much further into that. Now, here, I just want to clear up a myth. The myth is that Boyer came to Blackdom, but his father never did. His father's obituary says that he died in the home of his son in Roswell. So if you ever hear the myth that Henry Boyer didn't make it to Blackdom, you can see here he made it to the Promised Land. Died on South Kansas Street. And I won't go into that. 1928, oil test near Blackdom. Again, Blackdom is still focusing on the oil, even though that Blackdom doesn't exist. supposedly. Basically, black folks went underground, collected their royalty checks, and stayed in places like Altadena or Vado. Frank Boyer went to Vado. Now, I have not mentioned this person, but I cannot tell you about Blackdom without telling you about Mittie Moore Wilson, a madam in Roswell, not Blackdom, bootlegger, gunslinger, and one of the largest owners in the Blackdom Oil Company. Also in that, the digital part is Ruth Loomis Skeen's poem, Dark Lover, about a white woman with a dark lover. She doesn't write it under her own name, though. She writes it under the pseudonym and the Negro-tized name, Reba Kane. You know, because she was on the black side of town. Because, you know, when you're on the black side of town, you got to live. Some people liked it, some people didn't. So she got a lot of critique, I'll just tell you that. But in California, there was a literate class in Los Angeles, Eugene C., Los Angeles, California, in 1929, is writing about this dark lover poem. Again, I'm trying to bring us back to Ruth Loomis Skeen on the white side of town. Also, what happens in 1929? We don't have to go through that. But all that is happening at the same time. You can read this later. I told you I was going to skip some of this. So, Juneteenth was really important in Blackdom, okay? But in 1930, they celebrated in Roswell. And you should see how they celebrated. I'll just begin. At dawn, on Thursday, June 19th, a salute of 9 guns fired by Battery A will usher in the 65th anniversary of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation by Abraham Lincoln. There was money and institutions still connected to Blackdom and Blackdomites, even as they entered into Roswell. I'm going to go back to this one real quick, just to give you an idea. So, this family, the Allen family, is also a family who moved from the cities that they were in to reclaim the land that they still own in Blackdom, but they still haven't been able to take over the land that is theirs, similar to the Heron family. Again, they need help. They may even need your help to tell New Mexico to let my people go, or at least let them get to Blackdom. So as we get to the end of this presentation, the Afro-Frontier allows us to understand black people through a different lens, besides the notion of slavery being the single way in which black folks existed in the beginning and at the end is just trying to be free. Instead, we can see that there is a sovereignty that existed prior to, while in Africa. Sovereign beings in Africa, Africans, in diaspora. What ends up happening, however, is the only way that it can exist in this modern world is through commercial means. And so you end up with cowboys in Compton. Anyone familiar with where Compton, California is? Southern California, right? How in the world did Compton get cowboys? Seriously, right? Don't we know that as the hood? Does it cost money to take care of a horse? See what I'm saying? See? The Compton Cowboys, the younger version, I grew up with the older version. The younger version is making brand deals and rapping and making experimental music. So what you end up with is the Afro-Frontier continuing within our media cycles. So thank you for attending. I'm going to explain a little bit. So this is about 40 square miles around Blackdom, okay? And I don't know if this needs to be taped or not. So Blackdom is here. They're still pumping oil, I mean literally pumping oil over here on Vincent's land. They're still pumping oil today. Do you think that Blackdomites are getting any of that royalty? We all on the same page. Again, this is what Blackdom looks like today if it was animated. New Mexico lands, the Heron family who can't get to their land, and then Blackdom's 40 acres. Can't get there either. And this is a QR code if you would like to purchase my recently published book, which is a version of my dissertation from 2015 when I graduated. I refined the significance of the Afro-Frontier and turned it into a book. Any thoughts, feelings? There's an audio book of it coming out soon. Any thoughts, feelings, questions? Yes.
Why is it that we've heard in the past that the
Because Frank Boyer, see, this is the legacy of Frank Boyer. I'm just going to give you one. There were others. Frank Boyer, he first entered past the 98th meridian as a Buffalo soldier. He was a part of platting Fort Huachuca. He was a part of the first border patrol. Again, remember, we started in 1519 where black men were at the tip of the spear in the genocide of indigenous peoples. Frank Boyer, when he came past the 98th meridian, was what? Still at the tip of the spear in the genocide of indigenous peoples, but as border patrol or as a Buffalo soldier. So that's why they say that. But there are a few others that were a part of it. What is it, Fort Stanton? Is it Fort Stanton over there by Ruidoso? Anybody? Yeah, that's where you get the Buffalo soldiers out of that era and space. So, any other thoughts? Yes, go ahead. Oh, okay. They wouldn't let me in Pasadena, but go ahead.
Well, I like the job here, just like I'm but what was it about Altadena that drew black and other than black and red light? Why did they go there?
To Altadena? Right, they wouldn't let them in Pasadena was number one. Number two, California pretended like Jim Crow didn't exist. So there was a freer sense of existence by going to California. In fact, if you read Loomis's letter, she says, I have lived from California to New York, and the only place that didn't have segregation was California. That's the only place she's lived where there was no segregation as was understood. So, and Altadena was one of the places that allowed that.
I want to thank you for doing corrective surgery on racism and sexism that affected the black community. I want to thank you, hopefully, as a philosopher, thinker, who can elevate us to a higher level so that we can understand what we are going to do right now, because this disease is still going forward and we cannot think it's just COVID.
The intellectual genocide, as I described at the beginning, is perpetual. Again, some of the things that I just said today will get you fired as a substitute teacher in the Santa Fe Public Schools. They would fire you. Oh, yeah. So I will say your question and then elaborate. She asked if there were only two families, or were there more than two families? Yes, there were directly connected with Blackdom was about 800. Okay, but you have cousins and so on and so on, so you end up at about 1,000. I'm gonna bet it was about 2,000 indirectly connected to Blackdom. But families, I have calculated anywhere from 50 to 100. I'm giving a range, but about anywhere from 50 to 100.
Who's paying the taxes on the land?
The families?
But not the ones that didn't know that.
No, so there are layers of family, and what it appears to be is one person in the family was told, hey, this is some land, pay the taxes on it, and then boom. But you know how family stops talking to one another and that kind of stuff. That's basically how that happened. But yes, the families are still paying taxes on it. It's homestead land, though, so it couldn't be taken even if they didn't pay the taxes. I mean, you know, in New Mexico, you could still take the land, but go ahead. Go ahead.
The state land is leased to private.
Yes. Emery Urelli's company, the Chavez Land Trusts. And he literally called up the elder that is paying the taxes because her phone number is there and started harassing her, telling her nobody cares about that thing called Blackdom. He's done that all across the country. Pestering black women who still own land. He even took a woman's house from her, what was it, Chicago or something like that? I can't remember where. Anyway, so this is a bad guy who's actually leasing this land. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. We need to end on a good note. But yes, there are ranchers over there. Paul Taylor, the family, has gobbled up a lot of the land that the families couldn't hold on to. The federal government still owns doesn't really own where the silo is, but yes, federal lands is still over there. So yes, but some families were still able to hold on to their land. Let me go right here and then I'm gonna go back there.
How is it that the Hutton family that owned that mile?
Hutton?
Yeah. How is it that they?
Heron.
How is it that they can't access the river?
I can show you, but what happens is there's only one road, okay? And so there's a gate. Hold on, I'm gonna go straight to, I have 3 minutes, I don't have enough time. But okay, so you have your phones, right? This is the beauty of digital age. Okay, so if you have Google Earth, put in Blackdom Well, okay? And what you'll find is that Blackdom still exists because Google Earth knows it's there, and if Google Earth says it, it's true, right? But if you go down Chickasaw Road where Blackdom is, it'll be a gate. And that gate is owned by New Mexico state lands. However, they give the key and the chain to Emery Urelli, the racist person who uses the land. So it's landlocked by these gates or by these roads that stop being roads. And if you go on a road, it could be a private road, And you know, it's New Mexico. Do you really want to be confronted by someone holding a gun? I mean, you know, like, so there are those kinds of things. Now, the land that I took the Heron family to, there was no gate, so that's why we were able to get on it. But it was off of Wyo Road, which means that as you're going down Chickasaw Road and you get to the prison and it says you can't go any further, you gotta go further. And I have video of that too as well. I'm gonna go all the way in the back. Oh, okay, go ahead.
So in my own research, I've kind of noticed that there was this run of black mayors in New Mexico, small town in New Mexico in the 60s. Have you found any links between those mayors and Black?
I think, I have not thought about that, but I'm glad you brought that up. There has been a solidarity within New Mexico that is unlike any other state, which is why I love New Mexico more than, let's say, an Arizona or a Texas. But the solidarity amongst sovereign peoples and native peoples in Mexico has allowed for the notion of race not to fully take hold, right? Like, even though the Human Genome Project has already told us that race doesn't exist, racism does. And so because racism was perpetrated on Mexicans and indigenous peoples, there's a certain empathy that has allowed for things like black mayors.
Well, to me, it seems like it's more of an economic reason that they were able to achieve.
What do you mean?
In other words, they had money. They have legacy, they had money, they were in one case, this mayor built a library.
Okay.
And so was able to achieve that, popularity, sophisticated elected. So I thought
Okay.
it's kind of a family legacy of wealth.
Yes.
To the mayor.
Yes, that wealth was at the expense of native and indigenous peoples. Okay. All right. Yes. Then I'm in agreement. Yes.
Well, I was just wondering if there were any
I have not gone down that rabbit hole, but I promise you if I get some funding, it will definitely happen. I'm writing a second book. I already have the first draft, and it's talking about from 1930 all the way to the present time. So trust me, if I get some money, I can answer that question. We're past time, but I'm going to answer this last question. If there's another one, I'll answer it real quickly. Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. I knew we could end on a good note. Thank you.